Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's CXL webinar. It's on how to find the right audiences and grow your business. So, let's see, why are we doing this webinar? That's a question that we should probably answer first. First and foremost, Michelle and I, who you also see on the screen, we're just passionate about audiences and PPC. We write about this stuff all the time. We speak about it all the time, all over the country. So that's the easy answer. But for real, we wanted to get the information out there that, it's already past due. I say that PPC marketers should be stepping away from focusing on keywords all the time. And it's all about keywords and making sure my keywords are my ads, my landing pages, and stuffing it all over the place. So stepping away from that and focusing on the people who actually type in those search terms and keywords, because the keywords aren't the ones who are going to be buying your products or services. It's the people. So the more that we focus on those users instead of keywords, it's going to give us a lot of information and better results on how we can come up with some pretty effective marketing strategies. Now, there is a ton of information that we could cover, but we only have about like an hour to go through our presentation and hopefully answer a lot of your questions. So we just want to go over a few different favorite ways that we could research our audiences and target our better users, and give you a preview of the course that Michelle and I are putting on for CXL. That's going to be live on Monday, just to get you an idea of some of the content that is going to be included in that course. So this is just going to be a little bit, a little like teaser, as I like to say. So I'm going to share my screen and get the slides up and running. I'm assuming hopefully everyone can see my screen. But first, since you just heard the wonderful voice of Michelle, I want to introduce my co-host. I like to call her, she is my PPC PIC, as I say it. This is Michelle Morgan. So Michelle, introduce yourself, say hi.
Yes. Hello, everybody. So I am Michelle Morgan, Director of Client Services at CXL Marketing, and have had a friendship with Joe for a little while. And the audiences are something that we have talked about. Like he said, we have each individually spoken about them, written about them, all that kind of stuff. But we really kind of have started working on different projects together to be able to kind of up each of our games, if you will. And that's a lot of the stuff that we put into this course. We kind of took some of the things that Joe's really good at that I might not have had as much knowledge, and the things that I have that Joe could take away a couple of things from, and we kind of combined it all to make this one course to really have what we feel like is a pretty holistic approach to using audiences that hopefully everybody can take some stuff away from. So looking forward to dipping into a little bit of that today.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm Joe Martinez. I am the Director of Paid Media and Community for Granular in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I pretty much can align with exactly what Michelle said. This is the stuff that I already kind of mentioned that we just love speaking about and writing about. So we put a lot of just heart into this course and this webinar of just going to be a little teaser of what you can expect in the course. Again, there's so much we can cover, but we just want to show you a few actionable items that you could take away and start implementing and looking at right away. And we wanted to start with some of the easier stuff that, you wouldn't have to wait, 5 months to either get the right tool or the right developer to do this for you. We wanted to show you some stuff right now that you could just take and implement immediately and do that all weekend instead of enjoying yourself. So,
or starting on Monday.
Okay, I guess that's a better option. So we're going to dive in about just finding your target audiences. So typically when we're talking about PPC and how we look at our audiences, I think one of the things that we do default right off the bat is when you hear about audiences, you think about remarketing. And when you're first new to PPC or Google Ads now, is that you go into the audience manager and you start looking for how to create my audiences. And the easiest one that we always learn when we first learn about remarketing is just the website visitors. When we explain remarketing, this is for someone who doesn't know what it is. It's, someone visits my website and then they leave, and then I can create an audience for them based off of cookies and then follow that user around, and then we can kind of build on our knowledge a little bit, and we can target app users if you're using the proper app analytics. YouTube users is a huge favorite of mine because I do a lot of YouTube stuff for clients. So not only you can get users and build audiences off of people who watched your videos either organically or through when your video was an ad, but you can do some cool stuff with engagement. So if the user subscribed to your video channel, or if they liked a video, commented on a video, shared it, or added it to their playlist, you can create some audiences off of those engagement metrics, which can be pretty valuable. And then another pretty common one is the customer list for your customer match campaigns. If you upload your email addresses, you can do phone numbers. You can now do a certain way. You can add mobile data to target those users. Hopefully you're doing it correct legally. All right. You're getting that user permission. to do that. And then we see some custom combinations. So by default, this is what we typically like to start with. And it is okay. However, as I've grown on, and I know Michelle has done this too, is I have shifted of where I go to start creating my audiences within Google Ads. And I typically go to Google Analytics first. So there's certain items like the app one and the YouTube audiences where you can only create those within Google Ads. That's fine. A lot of the other ones, even if it's website visits, I want to create those within Google Analytics first, pretty much almost every single time. So within analytics, I mean, we could create an audience based off of almost any data point that you could view within Google Analytics, and just think about all the data that's in there. It's a ton. So if I want to really try to create some hyper segmented audiences based off of the data that I'm seeing already, why would I do that within Google Ads when I can just do that within Google Analytics? Because I'm already seeing who my audience is from a collective group of every channel that's visiting my website. So go into your admin section within Google Analytics, and under the middle property column, I have it blocked out right there. It's audience definitions. That's where we want to head out first. So once you get in there, you will see this screen right here, and you will get a list of recommendations for audiences that you can create within the tool. I skip those recommendations every single time, and I'm going to create a new audience based on exactly what I want as the marketer who should know my target audience as much as possible. So when we create a new one, there's a variety of different ways that we could build audiences, and we can combine a lot of these audiences together. But I just want to show you the different options that you have that you can see based off that left-hand navigation on this screen in the audience builder. So a very common one is demographics. You know, we see age and gender, and we can target that a lot specifically when we're building our campaigns. But if I want to build a remarketing audience, and I find out just through the data within Google Analytics that my target demographic are females ages 25 to 34, it gives me the information to go back to those users. And, you know, if I'm creating ad copy and I want to put some personality in that ad, I would probably want to get someone who's a female age 25 to 34 and put that ad in front of that user if I'm finding out that they're my bread and butter target audience. And then that's exactly what we can build and use this information for. Age and gender, very common. But another one I like to look at in the demographics are the affinity categories and the in-market segments. Now, in all these fields, I just added one option for an example. It's not an actual audience I'm building, just to kind of show you what, you know, this looks like when you're building it. But affinity categories and in-market segments, the options that you have, they match the affinity categories and in-market segments that you can use to target users on display and YouTube. So if you're already finding out like specific affinity audiences that already convert really well on your website, or in-market segments that engage really well on your website already, you can go and create those audiences to try to get more of those users off in the display network or remarket to those users in YouTube, because you're already seeing a better engagement rate based on the data within Google Analytics. And then we have a few other categories and locations. Another one I want to show you is just technology. I don't use this one too much. I just want to show you that it is an option. So the only way I've actually used this from a remarketing standpoint is I had a few clients who had an app. So instead of, when we're remarketing to users, instead of just doing yes, we can already remarket by device, but instead of just remarketing to just all mobile or just all tablet users, we were segmenting that out by the operating system. So if it was an iOS versus an Android system, we could segment that out. So instead of putting an ad of like, download our app now, we could do something to download the iOS app at the iTunes store, speaking specifically to that user and their device, because we all know the Apple versus Android people, they're pretty hardcore dedicated. So we could speak to those users.
Yeah, and on top of that, you can also, if you have a minimum OS that people have to be able to utilize your app, you can exclude the people who don't have an up-to-date OS. If somebody hasn't updated their phone in 4 years, you don't have to include them in your retargeting audience. So that can be another good way to make sure that you're leveraging that for like the app users.
Yeah, a very good point. But then another reason how I've used this audience too is building audiences for search, which we're going to get to a little bit later on in this webinar, is we can add all these audiences as observations into search. And we talk about that a little bit more when you take the course of the differences of the targeting versus observation. But observation is pretty much, we can add an audience to a campaign, just look at the overall data of how it performs, and then use it for bid adjustments. So yes, we can already do bid adjustments by device, but I can add additional layers to the bid adjustments if I find out that, you know, people coming from Safari or Internet Explorer, or I'm sorry, Edge now, whatever. If they find out that those users from my mobile campaigns or anything, they don't really convert as well, I can just lower my bids on specific devices or specific browsers. So that's another reason why the technology one could be pretty helpful. Behavior, Michelle, I know you use this one a lot, probably just as much as I do, is yes, page visits are nice, but I want to get the people who are going to be more engaged. So someone who comes and visits my website once and they're only on the website for a minute or less, I don't want those users. So I can either create an audience of those unengaged users and add them as audience exclusions. So I'm not remarketing to people who pretty much did not want my product or service and they probably won't ever come back again, and save some impression share and save some of my money. And then, of course, the obvious flip side is, if I'm creating an audience and I want to target only the really, engaged user, we can see this one if they were on my website at least 5 times, or transactions. If they bought something at least X amount of times on my website, I can do that. Now, I didn't put the e-commerce version, which is a couple ones down from the behavior option we see on the left-hand side. But e-commerce, you can select if they bought certain products. You can create an audience off of that. You can create an audience if the user spent at least $500 on my website within the past 30 days. That is a pretty valuable one. I probably should include it in this webinar, but I didn't. Shame on me. Because if you're launching a new product or you're launching a new sale, you might want to go after the people who have actively bought something and bought a good amount of money first on your website. So we can remarket to those users first before broadening our reach and just trying to remarket to anyone who just visited your website. And then one more that I want to show, and this is really important, is traffic sources. Because here, when we're talking about audiences, and I know we talked about a little bit of teasing this cross-channel integration of all of our audiences, this is definitely one way to do it. So if you're running social campaigns, and this example is just a LinkedIn, a very top of funnel campaign, and hopefully with all your social campaigns and your email marketing and everything that you're doing, you're tagging your URLs and your UTM parameters with your campaign medium and source. Because then we can create audiences from those UTM parameters that are coming into Google Analytics. So if I find out that I'm getting a lot of traffic from my top of funnel campaign from LinkedIn, and it's being, we might not see those direct conversions right away, but it's driving a lot of traffic. And we're finding out through the analytics that these people are pretty engaged. Then the question comes up is, what do we want these users to do next? What can we remarket to these users based on the original content that they saw and the original campaign we put in front of them? What would we want that user to do next? So then we will dive a little bit deeper into this one later on, and definitely within our course, we'll get into that data a lot more. But this is the perfect combination. And again, this is just one example because you can clearly see it has 0 users over the last 7 days. But if you do have that traffic and you find out that your bread and butter audience is females ages 25 to 34, they speak English, they come on their iOS device, they come to the website at least 2 times, and the original source is from Facebook, if you have an audience to be that hyper-targeted, you can remarket to someone with all those different categories at one time. So it gives us the opportunity, depending on how much traffic you have, to speak as close to our users as possible and create ad content that's going to really connect with that user, depending on what you consider is going to be your target audience. And as we find our target audience, we'll be able to do better segmentation and how we structure everything that we want to do within each of the channels. And I'll let Michelle kick off and go into that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to retargeting, one of the lists that is most heavily used is the list of people who did not convert in the past 90 days, for example. This is a list I see quite a lot. I feel like retargeting is something that we've all bought into. We're using it. That's great. You might have even used some of the audiences that Joe's talking about, but leveraging just a 90-day look back for just people who didn't convert has a couple of inherent problems. So as you can see, first is that 90 days is, for the most part, probably too long to treat everybody the same. Somebody has different intentions on day 5 than they do on day 89. And on top of that, not all converters are created equal. Just because 2 people came to your site and didn't reach the thank you page, as this URL rule would suggest, doesn't mean that they didn't reach that page for the same reason. Somebody might have gotten a phone call and just forgotten. Somebody might have just immediately said, I don't want this, and left. Or somebody could just be continuing to do additional research. And we need to be able to segment those lists a little bit differently. So what we're going to do today is go through kind of a high-level idea of how we can solve one of these problems. And then a little bit of a teaser, the answer to the other problem is actually in the course itself.
Oh,
so
man.
Yeah, so let's start off with trying to address the 90 days is too long issue. So as I said, this is a long time to treat people in the same audience, because if you get somebody who converts in this audience, that's great, but it could have happened on day 3, it could have happened on day 9, or it could have happened on day 89. You don't know. And that's something that makes it really hard to optimize, because what we need to do is speak to our audience in a way that gets them to convert. And if you treat somebody who converted on day 3 the same as day 89, you're probably missing the boat for a number, for a number of users there. So let's start to see how we can dig into some information. We can understand which day people converted on, or have some insight into it based on the time lag report in GA. So GA is still going to be a great tool for this. This report, if you haven't seen it before, allows you to see the lag in days from the first time somebody visited the site to the time that they eventually took the conversion action that you want. So this report can be really helpful, especially for the account that we took this screenshot on, because you can see the number of days in lag in the far left, the number of conversions that converted on that day or in that date range, the next column, and then the conversion value is something that was really interesting for this client. We had a lot of people who would convert relatively quickly, but the people who provided the most value were the people who converted on day 12 and on, compared to conversion volume. So that's something to be able to look at. And one of the things you can do in the image on the right is that you can choose which goals you actually want to see this data for. Maybe goal 2, you just have people who downloaded a white paper or visited your blog, but maybe goal 6 is something more like, this is somebody who has actually requested a demo or made a purchase of over $500 or something along those lines. You can have very different levels of conversion for each of the different goals. And this report will let you see how each of those is working. The problem with this report is that this is just information. There's nothing that you can take action on in this report. There's no button you can click that says leverage this data to be better. So what we need to do is to start to break up our audiences a little bit differently. So on the next slide, I've got the image of kind of the way that we would be able to do that. Instead of taking one audience for 90 days, let's take that same group of people and create 3 segments of that audience. So effectively, these are going to be nested audiences. So we've taken that same URL does not contain thank you in it and done a cookie look back of 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. I'm not going to get specifically into the campaign structure on how we do that here, but it will be part of the course to let you know how to leverage the audiences you target and the negatives that you exclude to be able to make sure that these audiences are mutually exclusive in your campaigns, which is important. But for today, I just want to start to get you thinking about the different time ranges that make sense for your client. For e-commerce stuff, maybe you've got something that's like if you sell socks, a pair of socks is a relatively small purchase compared to other things, even if it's online. Your 90-day look back might be way too long to have people in your look back window. If you're trying to sell an enterprise data protection solution for your Fortune 500 company, 90 days might just be the initial getting to know you phase. Those deals can take years. And in some cases, the membership duration on cookies might be a little long for that. But just take some time, look at the time lag report in GA to understand where you need to go and get some guidance on these different rules. But for the sake of today's webinar, I'm just going to use this example. So on the next slide, the other piece that I want to talk about is decreasing your call to action as time goes on. I think this is really important. And I know somebody asked in the chat about how we're getting audiences to engage. I think this is kind of the first instance that we're talking about that when coming into this webinar, is that we need to be able to talk to them in the way and thinking about how they're showing us if they are still engaged or not, and being able to adjust if they're not responding to what we've offered them. So for the example, let's say that 30 days is still a good recency time. We can stick with our firm call to action there. So for e-commerce, you might have asked somebody to make a purchase. Maybe stick with that. Don't discount anything yet. Don't do any bundles, nothing like that. Stick with it in 30 days. For B2B, could be the same range. Let's say you asked for a demo. Maybe stick with that action for right now. But as time goes on, that recency effect starts to go away. And we need to start to decrease the call to action and what we're asking somebody to give to be able to get them back into the audience audience. So maybe we soften that up a little bit. Maybe we start to put together a discount or a bundle or a shipping offer for e-commerce. And for B2B, maybe it's something where we back off a demo and now we just have like a gated white paper or a webinar or something like that to get people interested. And then the same thing, if they still haven't converted or come back or responded to that message in that kind of medium 60-day range, bump it back out to 90 days. They'll be in that date range. Start to soften up the call to action even more. Maybe for B2B, you just send them a free blog post that you just want them to read your content, know that you're a thought leader, be an educational source, and get them to come back to your site. And maybe for e-commerce, maybe you just want to show them your new fall line of socks, which I personally, as a sock enthusiast, would be very interested in. So just
She's
think
not
about,
lying.
No, I'm not. I have a pair of NASA socks on right now. They're pretty great. So just anything that you can kind of soften up to get people to come back. Don't just continue hammering somebody on the firm call to action that you asked for 90 days ago, because that's not going to get them to engage. If anything, you're going to start to become a nuisance, and then you'll have some negative brand energy around that.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay, so then looking at the two problems that we talked about, like I said, that kind of solves the 90 days is too long issue. Start to think about how we can put those things together. But then the other problem that I teased is that not all non-converters are created equal. So just because somebody didn't hit your thank you page, that's something that we need to start digging in to understand why they didn't and the cues that they're giving us on the site. And that's something that we'll talk about more in the course that launches on Monday. So if you're interested in that, definitely sign up for the course. We've got some really good information around that.
Yeah. And now we kind of talked about retargeting a little bit, but we want to keep in mind that audiences aren't not just for display and social. We can use audiences a lot within the search network too. And that is something that I think is still pretty underutilized. So when people think of audiences in search, the first thing that usually pops in the head is RLSA, remarketing list for search ads. But we can see that's just one option that we have. So the customer match list that we mentioned before, we can also upload those into search. In-market audiences, which are really big in display and YouTube, Bing actually added it to search first. That's something that they definitely beat Google for, but then Google added it to search too. It's still new in the grand scheme of things. It's not that new, but still fairly new in the terms of what we could target with search. So in-market audiences are, based on their users' behavior online that Google and Bing can track. We can reach people who are pretty much in the research mode. They're actively researching for whatever certain products or services that you might offer. And that might be a good option to segment out those audiences into different campaigns or ad groups and just target those users first or bid higher on those users. That's something that I've really started to push a lot, and I've seen some pretty good results. And then similar audiences, it's fairly common. I put that one at the bottom as I don't use it all the time, but it can be pretty effective if you find something that works. And again, if you are more on the social side, this is just kind of like lookalike audiences that you see on the social side. I hate to use like the name of it and the definition, but it pretty much is what it is. It's, find your good performing audiences, your best performing audiences, and then you can create similar audiences of users who have kind of like the same search patterns and how they behave online. And then you can try to be smart on how you expand your reach on those. Something to keep in mind with search. So with display, we can use an audience and keep those cookies for 100 users in the past 30 days. With search, so you don't do any like really creepy stuff on search, that cookie pool is a lot bigger. So it's about 10 times bigger, 1,000 users within the past 30 days. So it's pretty common. I've seen a lot of people just, I'm going to add all these audiences to all my search campaigns. And then all of them have way low search volume to even look at it. So keep that in mind. Again, when you're creating stuff like those hyper segmented audiences I mentioned within Google Analytics, if you want to use that for search and do some cool RLSA stuff or speak to the user differently, just make sure you have enough users first, or I only use it for display. But how do we use this? What's important with this? One example I have is at a retail client a while ago that had users who signed up for their newsletter, and we were lucky enough to really export that massive, customer match list because users willingly signed up for that email or that newsletter, and we can import that into Google Ads. So then we could speak to those group of users differently. So if those users who think about it, when you sign up for a newsletter, not only do you have to visit my website, so that's one point of contact, you have to willingly then sign up for that newsletter itself. So that's at least 2 points of contact. So that user is already pretty familiar with my brand and what I offer. So when that user who signed up for my newsletter comes back and just searches for my brand name, why would I show them a generic, boring brand ad that pretty much introduces the brand that they already know about? That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't really connect with that user. So when I speak to the newsletter people, I'm calling them VIPs, making them feel a little special, putting a little warmth in their heart, letting them know this is an exclusive sale just for you. You get 20% off. And then that's going to, in my hopes of why I want to do this is get a better click-through rate and get a better conversion rate, because I'm speaking to those users. They feel like I'm in the newsletter. I get I get special deals. Speaking to that user. And that's exactly how we can use audiences and search to change our ad message. Similar to what Michelle talked about in the last part, it all comes back to changing your ad message to speak to the users. If we're going to do all this work on creating audiences, we need to have the content to back it up. Here's another example of how we can do it in search. So at an instrument store client, again, they do sales on all their products on their website. However, people who play certain instruments, they have certain wants and needs and likes. So if I have we can see guitars versus drums. It is the same keyword that people are searching for. I'm just speaking to the user differently. So whether if you can segment your email list like we could in this example, or going back to Google Analytics and creating audiences based on people who bought certain brands or certain products, when the guitar player is coming back and searching for my store's brand name, they're not going to see a generic sale. I'm going to speak to the guitar user that there's a guitar sale going on, even though they look for the same keyword. I'm going to speak to the drum user that there's a drum sale going on using the same keyword. Again, switching up because I'm based off of their wants and needs. I play guitar. I don't play drums at all. I don't care about drums. I don't want drum products. So if I'm searching for the brand name and you're showing me what I want and need right away, I'm more likely to click on that ad, and I'm more likely to buy something because you're already talking about what I want and you're going to solve my problem and give me the cool products that I pretty much came in here in the first place. Here's another example of how we can change the ad message for users. So I had a fitness client that had a lot of videos on their website and on YouTube. So we were tracking this video engagement, and yes, this is one that we created within Google Ads. That's what we had to do. So we could see for people who've already watched a YouTube video on my site, we let them know that. We said, you've seen the video, now try it yourself. All right, so anyone who didn't see a video, whether on my channel or on the website, we're just planting a seed. Do you need a lifestyle change? Then give us a try. Now, you're saying, okay, what's new about this, Joe? You already told us about segmenting our audiences. Yeah, we get that. But the cool thing about this is that this is the very same ad. This is one ad in one ad group speaking to two different audiences. So you're like, how's that possible? How did we do this? All right, we can do this with if functions. It's something that Michelle and I use a lot because it's so cool. So about halfway through the image, we see the headline one, and then we see an opening curly brace. I call it curly brace. What is it? Squiggly bracket, whatever you want.
Squiggly bracket.
Squiggly bracket. Okay, we'll go with that one.
That's not the technical name, but that's what I call it.
That's more fun. Okay, when you open up a squiggly bracket, okay, and this will work in any search ad that you're doing. Within your headlines, you're going to get the drop down of the options that you have for ad customizers. So a very common one is that you can get your dynamic keyword insertion in there. There's the countdown customizer, which is pretty cool. But my favorite ad customizer are the if functions for sure. So when you select the if function option after the squiggly bracket, because we want to get that out there one more time, this is what we see. This is the default option that we get for creating an if function. Now, device is going to be the standard option, but we switch it. All right, select it and switch to audiences. That's what we want to do first. And then we can select the audience of what we want to include within this if function. So for that fitness example, I just chose anyone who watched a YouTube video on the site. That makes complete sense. Just for the sake of just showing you, this is not what we did with this particular client, but you can layer on however many audiences that you want. You can see there's the combined audiences, the similar audiences. It even has, the YouTube and the app ones down below. So all the options, those 4 options I showed you in the beginning of the webinar of what you can do to create audiences, you can add them for your if functions. And that's pretty cool. But for the sake of this one specific example, we only did people who watched YouTube videos that were embedded either on our site. And we also, I think, combined some of the organic views too off of the YouTube channel. So what I'm saying when I'm setting this if function up is if the audience is in my custom audience I created of YouTube embeds, then they will see the headline of you've seen the video. Anyone else who's not part of that audience, they will see the other headline of need a lifestyle change. So we can do this for every single one of our headlines, whether you're doing 2 or you're expanding to that 3rd headline in the new format of the expanded text ads. You can do an if function in every single one of your headlines. And that is pretty cool. So that is exactly how we can get, I'm showing you this exact same slide again, this is the same ad. We're just using pretty much a different formula to show a different ad message depending on who that audience is. And this will give you a pretty cool option to, one, it'll save you some time. So you don't have to create tons of different ad groups to really segment out, your users. You still have the option to do so, but you can now create many more ads in your ad groups and still make sure that you're speaking to the select audiences that you want to, and then having the default ad text. If no one else is included in any of those audiences that you're creating, everyone else will still see that kind of generic branding ad to make sure that you're still capitalizing on everyone. So, the reason why we want to do this is we can now use the same ad to speak to different users no matter where they are in the funnel. And that's pretty important, because when people are first visiting your website, they're going to have kind of what Michelle talked about. They need a totally different experience than someone who's already familiar with your brand, already engaged with your product. So I'm going to hand it back to Michelle and talk about how we can do more funnel building with our audiences in PPC.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the stuff that Joe just talked about is to be able to talk to people through the same ad. We can change things out, if functions, that sort of stuff. I'm going to start talking a little bit about segmenting audiences. What do you do when your audiences are big enough to segment them out? So you don't need to use the ad variant, the if functions, to be able to speak to them differently, but you really need to leverage your campaign structure to do it. So spoiler alert, there are real things called funnels. They help you take something from big to little, usually liquids, sometimes sand, depends on what you're doing. But the idea of a funnel in marketing is very much the same thing, and that's why we've called it a funnel. So on the next slide, you can kind of see just a very amazing Smartart version of what a funnel looks like. But basically, it's the same thing. We need to take people through the buyer funnel overall and take them from awareness all the way to action. So basically, people need to become aware of your brand at the top of the funnel. It's the largest audience. Then those who show interest can kind of move through the next stage of the funnel, then through to consideration when they actually start to think about buying your solution. And then action is when they finally take it. So what we need to start doing is put together I'm going to put together some examples of how we can actually move people through each of these different stages. But first, let's talk about, just for sake of, as we're going through this webinar, what the visuals of this gorgeous Smartart will be showing. So basically, each of the big blocks that have words in them are going to be the audiences, and those will kind of correlate there. And then the lines on them will actually be the individual calls to action. So once somebody is in the awareness stage, they're sitting up there in the top of the audience. Once they hit a filter or a specific call to action, we're asking them to do something. The people who do not take that action don't graduate to the next stage. They stay in that awareness stage of the funnel through our audience and campaign mapping. Again, we'll get through the actual mechanics of building the campaigns to do this audience mapping in the course itself. But for today, just talking about the high-level ideas of it. But then when somebody actually does take whatever that desired call to action is, whether it's from awareness to interest or consideration to action, whatever the different stages are, those people will move themselves into the next stage of the funnel. And through our campaign structure, we will then exclude them from the prior campaign. That way they're not then going to see the awareness message again if they've already converted on that call to action, because that's just a doubling up of that same call to action. It's not a good user experience, and it's not a good use of our budget overall. So let's go through kind of an example of what each of these would be. And this will also kind of get back to that engaging the audience type of piece. So let's start off saying that I'm just going to give the example of B2B software. I work with that a lot, so that's going to be the thing that rolls off the tongue easiest. But this funnel model can apply for pretty much any type of business that you have. Again, short consideration phase, long consideration phase, the process is the same, but your mechanics will be different for your business, for your client that you're working on. So let's say we want to target people to get more customers. So we want to start off with, like Joe said, we upload a list of our customers, we create a lookalike of them, and then we target them in that awareness phase. We can use a brand video to get them to be introduced to our B2B software. What's our name? What do we do? What are our passions? That sort of thing. Kind of tell the story of the different, of the company itself. And then we can use some engagement audiences, which again, we talk about a little bit in the course, of when people have seen 50% of the audience, those are the folks that we're going to consider a conversion piece. If somebody has only seen 25% of the video, we're not going to count that just yet. We want them to see more of the video before we move them into the interest phase. So we'll create the audience for a 50% video view, and then those folks will move themselves into the interest stage of the funnel. So these are the folks that have already seen 50% of the video. They understand what we do. Now what we need to do is start to get them to understand our value a little bit more. So we might send them something like an informational report or like an industry white paper, something along those lines, to kind of get the lay of the land of how a solution like ours can really help your business succeed. So whether it's gated or ungated, we want somebody to download that white paper as the call to action for this stage. So again, in the same way that the awareness piece, if somebody doesn't hit the thank you page for that, they're going to stay in that interest stage until they do, or until they lapse out with the time cookie stuff that we talked about earlier. But once they do hit that thank you page for it, they will move themselves into the consideration phase, where we need to start winning them over, not just for the solution that we're trying to provide, but beat out our competitors as to why we are the best solution for what we need. So I've had a number of clients will put together a free tool to be able to do like time-saving calculator or something like that. Usually B2B software is intended to save you time or save you money, something like that. So a really simple tool with some basic calculations. They can go in, plug in and understand, what do I need to type in, put in how much time you're spending now, how much money you're spending now, and the tool spits out something that you can get from there. So this is starting to show how our business can really help theirs and get them to the consideration phase. So once they have used that tool, that's the call to action that we want, and we'll eventually send them into the next stage. Again, if they don't use that tool, they'll stay in that consideration phase until they do. But once they're actually in that action stage, now we need to get them to actually talk to a salesperson. We've warmed them up all the way. They've seen our brand video up to 50%. They've got the industry report. They've seen how our tool can save them time. Now what we need to do is get somebody to talk to a salesperson and get them to sign a contract. So that's the last thing we need. So in here, I've got personalized assessment because demo is just an overly used word, but like product tour, the same kind of thing, the same solution applies, because that's what we want to get at the end of it. Because as marketers in a B2B space, that's our goal, is to get a lead to come in and go all the way through to talk to somebody on the sales team. For any of the e-commerce solutions, this same funnel applies, but it can be something where you're just introducing them to your brand and then showing them, I'm doing it again with socks. You can say, we do a bunch of socks, and then get them interested because you show all the different types of socks that you can provide, and then consideration around what your offers are, and then get them to come back and actually make a purchase, which if any of you actually sell socks, please send me your link because I will probably buy some.
Yeah, your Twitter handle is on the bottom of the slide, so feel free to reach out.
Just
send her some
tweet
socks.
at me. I would love
she doesn't
any
have
socks. Perfect. Hopefully you guys are getting a kick out of us talking about socks, because we are. So I think that overall, this pattern is what we need to be able to build into the campaigns. Again, we'll talk about the mechanics of it in the course itself, but just start thinking about the different calls to action that you have. How do those fit into this funnel model, and where can you start to build audiences to match that out? Then on the next slide, I want to talk about one thing that we need to remember is that we now live in a multi-channel world. This isn't people are not going to necessarily come to all of these different touch points through Google search, although we might like them to. What we need to be able to do is to capture them in any way, shape, or form they come to us, whether it's through, they might see the lookalike audience in Facebook, that way they see the video view. Then we retarget them on the GDN with that industry report. Maybe they come back directly to the site whenever they're out doing some additional research, and then they use the tool. We didn't even use advertising to bring them back. And then maybe the last step, they come through Google search just to make sure that they're doing one last thing. And that's the touch point that they actually sign up to get that personalized assessment and talk to the salesperson. Absolutely make all of your audiences within an individual channel, but also make them across all of the other channels you're going to use. Because on the next slide, it's really easy to just put something together for AdWords, for Bing, for Facebook, and even for Quora if you use that. Any of the other channels you use, they all have these basic retargeting functionality in here that you can use to leverage funnels. And any touch point that somebody wants to use to move themselves to the next stage of your funnel, whether it goes with it all in the same channel or it starts to go cross-channel, let them do it. If anything, you might find that you have some lower cost channels that you can use to be able to move folks through at an even quicker pace than you normally would. So make sure you're paying attention to cross-channel. We'll talk a lot more about cross-channel stuff in the actual course itself, because for today we only talked about just a little bit of what's going on. So I'm gonna pass it back to Joe, and then I know that we have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. So take it away, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going to what you said, we only had time to cover just a very small amount of what to expect. Michelle and I put in a ton of hours into this course, into these presentations to try to give you almost pretty much, I shouldn't say everything that we know, but pretty darn close. All right, so here's the entire journey of the course. To be honest, we didn't even really touch lesson 1 at all in this webinar.
No.
We kind of focused the beginning of this webinar on some of the stuff that we use to create good retargeting audiences. We saw that with using Google Analytics and the remarketing segmentation that Michelle talked about. So with lesson 1, sorry to kind of go back a little bit, we're really going to show again how you can really kind of deep dive and find your best performing audiences within Google Analytics. And then we also dive into how you can find those within using Facebook audiences with the LinkedIn Insight tool. Bing has audiences as well. We even dive into show you where you can find your audiences within Pinterest and how you can compare those different audiences together. So we're going to talk about that and find patterns in between all those different channels. So we'll get into that. We already talked about lesson 2 a little bit. So sorry, I'm jumping around. Lesson 3, we didn't touch on at all either. It's my favorite form of remarketing, which I like to call intent-based remarketing. So, I mean, again, typically we see people remarket with, someone that just visited my entire website or they just visited a page. And, we kind of went over a little bit in the Google Analytics standpoint of there's ways that we can target users a lot better than just someone visiting a page. Because think about all the percentage that you have of your bounce rate of people who maybe just flat out landed on the wrong page. They didn't mean to click on your ad. Why would we want to remarket to these users over and over again when they clearly will never come back to your website or ever want to see your product again? It's such a waste of time and money, and it's hurting your results. So with intent-based remarketing, we get to go into and remarket to users based off of actions that they've taken on your website, showing us intent by what they are doing on your website or your landing pages, and how we can remarket to those users first and change up our ad message to speak to users based off of actions instead of page visits. And then we kind of went over a little bit about if functions within the search network. That's just a small piece of what you can do in the search network, and we dive into a bunch of other components. And then Michelle closes out the course with a few of one about she'll deep dive and then go really heavy deep into building funnels with your audiences. And then we only really teased about leveraging the audiences across all the channels. So a lot of stuff that we talked about in the lesson 1 about where you can find these audiences in all these channels. Now it's going to be how can we really integrate them into a full strategy. And we briefly teased on about it with the UTM tagging. And then some of the stuff that you can do with all channels to build that funnel. So you see the link on the bottom. You can register online for the course. I believe it is going live on Monday. I said this has only been, 45 minutes so far in the webinar, and our course is probably close to 6 hours. So you can see there's a lot of content that we did not go over. But again, here's more details on the course about maximizing your audiences for PPC campaigns. Michelle won't let me yet, but we also have like a fun blooper video created about some of our mess ups while we were recording this course. It's fun. And don't worry, CXL people are like probably freaking out right now. No, it's PP, I swear. It's good. We're going to release it. That's going to be funny too. So stick around and, and be able to follow us and see. Recording a course was a lot of fun. So not only did we have fun getting together to do it, but again, hopefully you can see our passion about why we love talking about this stuff and why this is our favorite part about PPC. So if you really want to know on how to reach the right users, sign up for the course, reach out to us. I know we are going to be available even after you take the course to do some Facebook questions and answers. And again, our Twitter handles are right on the bottom there. So you can I'm on Twitter all the time. That's the best way to reach me. I was looking at my phone during the webinar. I saw like some people are already adding me on LinkedIn. I was like, that's great. I'll accept it, but I'm not going to respond right away. You should just reach me on Twitter because that's when I'll definitely see it.
Yep.
So I know we have time for some Q&A. I know I can't see it just based on my screen right now. I can close out of my slides, stop sharing my slides, and I can start answering some questions. Michelle, I don't know if you have some right off the
Yeah,
bat?
we've got some in the Q&A section, so I will go ahead and dive into a couple of those. So bring those up and be ready to answer some of those as well. So I know one of the questions, we had a couple from Dan in here. I'm assuming it's the same Dan. So first of all, hi Dan, thanks for joining.
Hi Dan.
I hear what you're saying about low conversion rates for lead gen on display and that kind of stuff. I think that one of the things that I have seen work well is to utilize the funnel process a little bit, to have the first touch be something that's a bit softer, maybe not ask for gated content or white papers, ebooks, even if it's really highly valuable, or if you know it's really highly valuable, maybe have the first couple of things just be free and then retarget to people with gated content later on. I've seen that work pretty well. I'm also curious if it never hurts to take a look inward to make sure that what you have is what your customers want, because what we want them to know isn't always exactly what they want to know. So if you can, just double check, make sure, do a little bit of research on what gets the most views on your site anyway. What are people constantly seeking out? Maybe even doing some keyword research to see the topics that are most interesting to them. And then craft content around that. So trying to take a little softer approach to start and retarget them later, but then maybe even just taking a look back in at the resources that you are offering. I do not doubt that they have high value, but maybe the cold touches on awareness stages for users, they're just not quite ready to take that investment just yet. So maybe just take a step back and see what else you can offer for that type of piece.
Yeah, did Dan mention what industry it was?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I mean, this is just kind of universal answer. So Dan, sorry if I'm not speaking to your exact industry.
B2B software. There you go.
B2B software. Oh, there you go. Here's a perfect example. So that kind of ties into, I like to use the example of like buying a car. B2B software, I'm assuming it's not super cheap, and can be a bigger investment. So if I use it to like buying a car, I look at it is, if I see a display ad for a car, that ad better not say like buy now on it, because that is a big purchase. It is not something that you see one display ad one time and you're like, you know what, I do want to buy that car because I saw an ad one time. It's the same thing with B2B software. They may click on it. The whole point of display is kind of what Michelle said. It should be top of funnel. Yes, if you get conversions from it, I say the same thing about YouTube. I think it's icing on the cake. If that is a product, like let's go back to socks. Someone can see socks online and buy that $5 to $15 purchase. They're probably more likely to do that from a display ad or from a Facebook ad or that type of thing. But with B2B software, if it is a bigger investment, if you have a contract that's for a longer commitment, odds are people probably aren't going to sign up immediately after seeing one ad and clicking on it one time. So that's kind of going back to what Michelle said of, nurturing that user a little bit more. And, we have to invest in how does that user come back again? That's where CRM systems can help. If you get them initially from a display campaign, they just get them something soft, like a newsletter sign up or a white paper download, like Michelle mentioned, getting them into your CRM. Now you can see how I go back and market to them and eventually convert how many of them initially did come back from my display campaign. And that's where you truly see the value of those audiences. I know we all live in tight, budgets. Everyone's bosses are focused on ROI and everything, but not everyone is willing to convert immediately at the first time. And I don't even do that with smaller items too. I was going to quote some stuff, but I don't have the source to say where it's from, so I'm not going to do it.
No, that works. And I think that, Dan, I know you asked another question, and I want to get to a couple other questions in the Q&A. That said, given the fact that we're on a webinar and that you're typing at us and we're talking back at you via the internet, feel free to reach out to one or both of us on Twitter. Happy to have a more in-depth discussion and help you kind of dig in a little bit more if you're willing to share a little bit more information there. So we can definitely do that if you're still looking for a little bit more guidance there. So then we have another question about which channels, and then it moved. You're welcome, Dan. If some channels are more effective than others for specific industries. I do see some channels are more effective than others for specific industries. I tend to see for like more tech-heavy type of things, or for reaching out to organizations that have really tall structures, if we should say, like organizational structures. There are like lots of layers in the company itself. Those types of channels work, but like I see those types of industries do best for like LinkedIn, that sort of thing. So for like really structured organizations. For more flat organizations, depending on the type of company you're trying to reach out to, I can see a lot of those do relatively well on Facebook because everybody's on Facebook. And in a flat organization, you might reach somebody who would be on the bottom of the totem pole or at a couple rungs down at a larger company, but at a flat organization, they might have more leverage in the company to be able to talk to maybe the key decision maker. So you can reach them a little bit cheaper on Facebook, and you don't have to reach the higher up folks. So I know that's not as maybe specific as you would have liked, but that's kind of one of the ways that I think about it, is around the organization or the organization structure of the company that you're trying to reach.
I would jump in, but I'm not going to lie. The first part of that question, my computer froze and I kind of lost everything. So I'm really glad it happened just during the QA and not during the actual presentation. So I won't be able to jump into that question. So Michelle, I'll let you pick another one.
Okay, sounds good. So let's see. What do you recommend as a starting point for lead gen when starting from beginning to target local business owners, Google or Facebook? Joe, what do you suggest? Google or Facebook for lead gen for local business owners?
I mean, first, I think search is always going to be the easiest way to capture the intent that's already out there. So first, I would look to see, specifically, depending on how the radius and how local you're going to make those campaigns, just see what is already out there and capitalize on that intent. So, like I said, search, you can only search doesn't create demand. Search is only going to capitalize on the demand that's already out there. So if you have a specific reach that you want to get, or you're just not getting the volume that you're getting from Google whatsoever, then I would expand. Now, you just said Google, and Google has a lot of different channels that you can use for all the different types of funnels. So I was speaking specifically from search. So from that perspective, I would start with Google. Then I would look at, we will talk about this in the course too, is how you can find out who your audience is. So Facebook will have the pixel. Obviously, we kind of showed you certain ways that you can look at your audiences on Google too, and try to figure out who, based on that information you get from people just naturally going to your Facebook page or naturally going to your website, who those users are, and then look at the targeting options that each of those channels have. About if you do want to start doing more ads to expand your reach to a wider audience, because like I said, you're at a starting point, you don't have customer match, you might not have big remarketing lists, so you are going to have to invest in top of funnel remarketing where you might not see that return right away, but then use the analytics in both Google and Facebook first and see what targeting options are going to best match who you think your target user is, and go with that channel. So I can't tell you it's definitely going to be Google, it's definitely going to be Facebook, but we have the tools and the capabilities to do that research and find our answers ourselves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say for local business owners, another thing to think about is that, in my opinion, Google's geo-targeting is better than Facebook. So if by local business owners, you don't just mean that you can target any local business owner across the country, but you need to target local business owners in certain locales. I think that the targeting on Google is better, and you'll be able to narrow down a little bit. But I agree, capture the demand that is in those regions, those areas first on Google, maximize any of the people who are searching for things, and then you can later use probably Facebook as the next step to reach out and get in front of more people, just given the reach that Facebook has. Not to mention local business owners, a lot of them will utilize Facebook as their main website in some ways, as well as the key source of any type of customer reviews, customer communication, any of that kind of stuff. So Facebook can be a good way to reach out after that. And then Joe, I don't know if your computer is still frozen, but we had another question come in.
Yeah, no.
Okay, good. So using similar audiences for targeting on display. Okay, I'm going to let you tackle this one first again. Was working well, but seems to have diluted from the ideal customer. Also do B2B software for SMB. Any advice for rebooting the audiences or campaigns?
Mm-hmm. All right. So similar audiences are honestly some of the last audiences I do. First, I don't know what sort of like window duration for that similar audiences that you're using. But sometimes it could be pretty broad, and users are going to go in and out of that audience pool. So you can monitor that and adjust your bids accordingly to that. But if you're seeing the trend, it's just been dead for a while and it's not coming back, I would strongly look at two different types of audiences within Google Display first. So when you create your audiences, we see basic affinity audiences, which are pretty broad. They're like TV demographic audiences. You can create custom affinity audiences about almost an endless variety of whatever keywords and URLs you want. So affinity audiences, because I said URLs, they are not remarketing audiences from other URLs. They are creating audiences based off of keywords and URLs that users have shown interest at some point in the past. So again, it's not a remarketing audience off of other people's websites. You cannot do that. That does not exist. But there's certain affinity audiences I create, to try to reach new users first before I even go to similar audiences. So you can create a custom affinity of all your competitors' names and your competitors' URLs. That one works pretty darn well. Mm-hmm. If you're in a pretty specific industry, so what types of conferences does your audience like to go to? What type of publications do they like to read? What organizations might they belong to? Create custom affinity audiences based on all those different search terms and URLs and break them up pretty specifically. And then Google's going to show you like the top 5 like website topics that this audience that you're creating typically likes to visit. And you're going to see pretty quick of whether it's a relevant audience or not.
Yeah.
And then
go ahead, Joe.
Oh, one more real quick.
Okay.
And then there's another one for, instead of in-market audiences, you can create then custom intent audiences where that is going to be, again, more of those people or custom affinity is people who have shown interest in the past. Custom intent audiences are people who are actively researching. So Google wants you to add up at least 5 different keywords and URLs, and then they're going to give you different suggestions of what people might be, actively researching for now. So create that custom intent audience first, which I've seen work even better. One more point, Michelle, then I'll shut up. Custom intent audiences on YouTube are based off of broad match search queries that people have actually searched for on google.com. And that's only available on YouTube for now. And I said I do a lot of YouTube stuff, and it is by far the best audience targeting option I have for YouTube. I mean, if they're actively searching for your products or services, just download all your converting keywords, create a custom intent audiences, and find more of those users. It's crazy good. All right, I'm done.
Okay. Drop the mic, or don't drop the mic. It's an expensive mic probably. So I would say the other thing, if you really just want similar audiences to keep working better, I first of all say definitely try the stuff that Joe talked about. But if you need to just get similar audiences to work again, the way you can quote unquote jumpstart it is actually to, annoyingly, probably abandon the lists that you currently have or just keep them on as layers, but then create additional, more meaningful retargeting lists for Google to then go find users based off of. The only problem is that you can't force Google to make a similar audience for you. It has to be based on if they can find a good enough pattern. So if you need to get similar audiences to work again, maybe you have a list of people right now that's 50,000 users, whoever it is, maybe try and find a slightly different take on an audience that has the same amount of people. Maybe you uploaded a customer list and you can take a different slice of the data there, or you have something that people visited certain pages on your site, maybe have another set of pages or something. Basically create another root audience for Google to go after and just keep iterating on that. Because like Joe said, people will go in and out of the similar audience over time, but after a while it can stagnate, and a way to kind of try and reboot that to find some new users is to basically give it a new root audience to build off of. So I know that we are pretty much at time. We've got a minute left. There was one question that I think kind of leads into us wrapping it up, would be, somebody said, how much time do we need to invest to complete the course? So the answer to that is how long the course is. And like Joe said, the course is about 6 hours long. So we've got a ton of stuff in there, but it's broken down into different courses. You can go at your own pace. You can figure out what makes the most sense for you. We try to give a number of examples going back and forth. So I think the full thing, like I said, is about 6 hours, but take little bite-sized steps. There are some questions in there that you can do, some exercises, that sort of thing. Push pause, come back to it, test some stuff out in your account. But I would also just like to say, like I said to Dan earlier, that goes for anybody. If we haven't gotten to all the questions yet, but if you guys also have any other questions for Joe, myself, either now, today, over the weekend, if Joe forces you to work over the weekend, or just as you're going through the course or just over the coming months about audiences. We are always super excited to talk about audience strategy, whether it's across any of these networks, anything. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out. We put our Twitter handles in there. We're serious about it. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. We're more than happy to talk to you.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, I think that's it. So thank you for everyone for joining. I actually see some more questions coming through now. Unfortunately, like I said, Michelle, reach out to us, but we really appreciate you joining the webinar, and hopefully you check out the course, which will be going live next week, and reach out to us at any time. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys.